Okay, so the third phase of the logical framework approach to building capacity for resilience is plan of activities. So here we talked about projects and programs that actually build on the objectives that are already defined for a preferred future that we want out of the current risks and analysis of the current situation. So the next step of logical framework approach is the plan of activities needed to generate the expected results required to fulfill the defined purposes and overall goal of the project or program. These activities are, in other words, no ends in themselves, but the means to reach the desired ends as specified in the objectives analysis. That requires the plan of activities to include all activities necessary to generate the expected results. So monitoring and evaluation is always there, and a guarantor of success is somehow designated, let's say. However, that also requires the plan of activities to include only the activities necessary to generate the expected results and not anything else. Hence, clear connections between activities and objectives are fundamental. It's also important to note that the activities of capacity development projects and programs are often dependent on each other in such a way that the success of one activity requires successful completion of others. So interdependencies are unavoidable, both for itself and for generating particular expected result required in order to meet the purpose of the initiatives. So the interdependency has to be taken care of. The plan of activities must therefore be more than a list of activities. It must be a plan specifying when, where, and how the activities should be implemented, especially since the activities of capacity development for resilience often must address several or even all capacity levels described above to have any sustainable impact. In adaptation, we talked about resilience, and we had talked about how the resilience of the system is as weak as the weakest component of the system. So here we are saying unless all components are completely covered for the desired state to be accomplished, all the other components are going to fail if they are dependent on this particular component, right? So finally, the plan of activities is based on the objectives analysis and may even have been initiated during the goal-oriented project planning workshop. However, the plan of activities is typically developed and finalized by the project team of internal and external partners, as it is impractical to involve all actors in translating the agreed objectives into specific activities. The plan of activities is summarized here in box 9.6. So let's do that here. Summary of plan of activities. The plan of activities can be summarized as the answer to the three questions as before. They are all answers with relevant questions to be posed to assure success. What activities are needed to generate the results required to fulfill the purposes to reach the goal of the project or program? How are the identified activities dependent on each other? In what internal order are the activities implemented to assure success? Okay, so leaving the plan of activities there, let's move to resource planning, which is the most critical, because without resources nothing is going to happen, no matter how good the plans are. The sixth step of the logical framework approach is resource planning, which normally needs to be initiated more or less simultaneously to the plan of activities and to some extent also influence the objectives analysis. So resources are going to decide your objectives to some extent. The good example, one good example is to think of let's say a coastal city that is planning for sea level rise. Sea level rise projections may be there and you may have uncertainties in them, but to deal with the projection or sea level rise, you will immediately run into an issue of how much it will cost to protect against sea level rise, no matter what the projection is. Even if the projection is 1 meter, you will do some calculations to see how much it will cost to build a protection against 1 meter of sea level rise, and if it is not possible to come up with so many resources, you're going to compromise and say we'll only plan for, let's say, 40 centimeters or 50 or 60 centimeters of sea level rise, arise, because that's the resource limitation. So objectives analysis in this sense then has to work backward to define a preferred state that is set for sea level rise of 60 centimeters, and then have contingency plans if sea level rise exceeds 60 centimeters. Okay, the plan of activities requires resources for implementing it to generate the expected results to reach the purposes and goal of the project or program. In other words, resource planning entails producing a plan specifying what resources that need to be allocated when and where for implementing the planned activities. These resources include a wide range of cash or in-kind contributions spanning from hard currency to work hours, and from stationery to venues for events. So you need to be very flexible in that sense. Including both cash and in-kind contributions in the resource planning facilitates and elucidates co-funding between internal and external partners, which often is overlooked and undermining the so important partnerships for capacity development, as I present later in this chapter. So there are many limitations if you think about external partner as a funding agency or internationally set up climate fund, green fund, or loss and damage fund. Then can you rely on it to be reliably delivered to you on time and to the extent needed, or is it going to be subject to many factors that are beyond your control? So these partnerships are very critical, and their reliability, credibility, and so on are very important as well. It is fundamental for resource planning to specify not only all contributions in detail, but also which partner controls what resources. Otherwise, this risks ending up in unclear or ambiguous responsibilities, which in turn is likely to undermine effective implementation of the planned activities. Okay, so the risk ends up being, left hanging and not being fully covered in terms of capacity development for resilience. This is particularly problematic when, sorry, I'm getting a phone call here, excuse me, I have to pause here. Good Lord, it's actually a scam called telecom department calling to block numbers, etc. Okay, unfortunate points, issues of modern life, right? So anyway, it's fundamental for resource planning to specify not only all contributions in detail, but also which partners controls what resources. Otherwise, the risk ends up being unclear and ambiguous in terms of responsibilities, which in turn is likely to undermine effective implementation of the planned activities. This is particularly problematic when there are many actors contributing with resources, and when the successful implementation of the activities requires timely allocation of them, which unfortunately is not entirely uncommon situation for capacity development for resilience. The resource planning is, in other words, directly dependent on the plan of activities in such a way that a clear and detailed plan of activities makes resource planning easy, while a vague and sketchy plan of activities makes resource planning very difficult. This important aspect of the resource planning are summarized in 9.7, which is right here. Summary of resource planning. Resource planning can be summarized as the answer to two questions. What resources are necessary for the implementation of the activities of the project or program? What resources are controlled by which actor? Okay, so maybe I should come back and leave the indicators for the next podcast. So let's leave this here for now, and I may have to run away again, but I'll continue with the indicators another day. Okay.